Silencing 1,000 barking dogs, muzzling mental mania, transcending delusion, the insane egoic mind, fragmented thought, and the illusion of the world. I am your author, your presenter, your host, Father Bryan Rice, OFJ, that's Order of the Friends of Yeshua, and OBC, Order of the Brahmic Christos. I'd like to start with a little story, a Hindu story, that tells of a time when all men were gods, but they so abused their divinity that Brahman, the master of the gods, decided to take away their divine power and hide it in a place where they would never think of looking for it. So the great problem was, where could he hide it? The minor gods were convened to seek a solution to this problem, and they said, let's hide man's divinity in the soil. But Brahman replied, no use, man will dig the fields and find it. The gods then replied, in that case, let's throw man's divinity to the bottom of the deepest ocean. Again, Brahman replied that sooner or later, man would explore the oceans and finally find it. Whereupon the minor gods concluded, we can't think of any place on earth where man might not one day think of looking for it. Brahman then said, here is what we will do with the divinity of man. We will hide it deep in himself, for that is the only place where he will never think of looking for it. Pure Pratervan. And he said of that story, since then, man has circled the earth, explored, climbed, plunged, and dug in the earth through his search for something that is in his heart already. We are inherently good and inherently gods. It may sound heretical, but Yeshua Jesus said it, and he quoted the psalmist from the Old Testament. Ye are gods. We are co-creators with God. We have always been able to do that, to manifest whatever is in our hearts. But why does the human mind interfere, the egoic mind interfere, and create a nightmare, the nightmare of violence, of hunger, of hate, of inhumane treatment of others, of prejudice, of separation, of starvation, of illness? Why do we manifest separation and scarcity, insanity, suffering, misery? A Course in Miracles says, this world is an hallucination, a collective dream. Don Miguel Ruiz, a Toltec wisdom teacher, says that this world is a mental hospital. Is God really responsible for that? Oh God, is there an end to this madness of suffering? And how could you do this to me? Well, newsflash, we did it to ourselves. Despite what you've been told, it is us who created this nightmare. We exist in a frantic mental thought structure that makes us think we are separate beings, that we are separate from the Edenic state of oneness. We do this when we misperceive, miscreate, misproject images and imaginings from our mind, projecting out our mental movie. We try to disown our shadow. We project it outward, and then it comes to fruition. Our bodies are condensed thought that originates in a quantum soup of ceaselessly flowing river, the womb of creation, the primordial matrix out of which all life materializes or dematerializes. Now the body is the creation of our egos, as is the dream we call a world, the world that we know in subjectivity and relativity, and in duality, and in individuality. This program targets misperception, miscreation, misprojection, and misunderstandings. We misunderstand the function, the origin, and the mechanics of thought and manifestation. As the Course in Miracles states, Nothing real can be threatened, and nothing unreal exists. Herein lies the peace of God. What is not real are our thoughts. The thoughts of the egoic mental stream. There are two thought systems: the voice of God consciousness, the voice of love, or egoic consciousness, the voice of fear. This whole entire program is about thought reversal, thought adjustment, getting in the flow with the right stream. We need to allow the thought stream of God to be downloaded into our system to rewire and reprogram our minds to create a new world. Duality is the effect of the causative movement of insane ego separation out and away from the unified field, which some like to call God or pure being. A Course in Miracles, like Hindu yoga thought about cosmology, teaches that the entire universe and our world was manifest through duality, or dvaita, that a certain force, dark and mixed in its nature, called the Satanic Force by Swami Kriyananda, it moved outward and away from the ultimate reality of spirit, and then manifested the world of mere appearances, manifest in the multiplicity of form, material form, a subjective dream state rooted in delusion, in imagining that which we traditionally call the fall, was the densification of our souls and spirits into the material world. Essentially, we must tackle the problem of unawareness, of our unconsciousness, of that forgetful nature that forgets our divine nature in the primal state of Edenic oneness. Oneness is a place that we never left but only appeared to. That place is the infinite garden of love in consciousness. Pierre Pradovan also says that the most important choices we make in life are not the dramatic turning points such as a change of career, the person we marry, the country we emigrate to. The most important choices in life are the thoughts and feelings we choose to entertain moment after moment, day after day, because they shape our lives more surely than any outward circumstances. So I'll say it again, but a little differently. This program is about thought reversal, thought adjustment, mind training, and entrainment of the intelligent heart, the fifth brain in the fivefold brain system, with the lower four. Entrainment is an act of communion experienced biologically and spiritually. Join us. This is a production of Project New Humanity Communications. Or whether you call it the God mind or the cosmic mind or supreme consciousness or universal inspiration, whatever it may be. Now, this quote I shared from Yogananda was specific to meditation. And why are we so restless? Why are we so overwhelmed? Why do we have a fragmented or scrambled existence in our psyche? Why are we not whole? Why are we divided? Why do we suffer from being broken? There's a book called The Broken Brain, and it's just a term I wanted to throw out there. Now, a lot of the phenomenon we're going to be talking about is really sensory overload. sensory overload. There's so much information out there. So there's the exterior element of this experience of a schizoid state, of schizoid avoidant or schizoid paranoia. Eckhart Tolle says that most of our thinking is repetitive and useless. Repetitive and useless. And it's what keeps us bound and in bondage to the past and to the future of something that hasn't even happened yet when we're in worry. Now, there's two emotions, and the Course in Miracles speaks of that, love and fear. When we're in love, in the presence of love, when we feel loved, and we are love and we are loving, it's hard for us to be anywhere but the present moment. We are in the now. We are what we are, which is being, not doing, being, simply being. Now, the type of schizoid phenomena that I'm choosing to focus on here, it may not always have organic measurable causes, but I am not dismissing that as a possibility as part of this whole presentation, which you'll be a part of. Now, there are many people who suffer from maladies of schizophrenia and schizoaffective disorder. Are these people nuts? Are they crazy? Or are they having just simply sensory overload? Are their thoughts possessing them? Are their thoughts overtaking them? Are there spiritual forces involved? Those are all questions, age-old questions. You know, people say that the field of psychiatry, that psychiatrists are the new priesthood. It's funny because it's mentioned in a book, Mind, Care of Spirit, by Gerald May, that he presents mental illness and spiritual experiences of the dark night of the soul as very compelling, in a very compelling way. Now, what's going to be important to consider in all of this is our desires and the mind, that the sense-driven mind, the sense mind, or the blind sense mind, in the words of Yogananda in the book, his interpretation of the Bhagavad Gita, which he entitles "God Talks with Arjuna." So the blind sense mind, and desires. We're gonna have to sift and sort through what are godly desires and what are desires of the ego. Bodily desires sometimes are equated with the ego. Why I'm on the topic, godly desires would be anything for beauty, admiration, worship, oneness, compassion, things like that. Desires of the five senses or the blind sense mind would be things that we think we need that are outside of ourselves to be happy. That's a lie. There's nothing outside ourselves that can make us happy. Because even God dwells within. The kingdom of heaven is within, not without. It's not coming in the sky. It's not coming in the ocean. Because if it is in the sky, the birds will precede you, or will precede that experience. And the fish will. And if you think that the kingdom of heaven is in the ocean, this is from the Gospel of Thomas now. The kingdom of heaven is within. It's even in the canonical Gospels, the Gospels in the Bible. Many people they overlook that. They think it's out there. They think it's going to be coming in the future. That it's something that we need to bring to earth because it's not here. Well, it is something that we need to manifest here in the earth space-time continuum, in the universe, and anywhere else that life dwells. It's something we give birth to. It's in us. The seed was planted in us by God, and it's something we have to give birth to. Now, getting back to the idea of thoughts, because if we're going to talk about schizoid states, fragmentation, the wandering mind, the scrambled mind, and most importantly, for our purposes of this discussion, the reactive mind. Those dogs that bark in your neighborhood, that bark in a chain reaction, it is a reactive mechanism based on things that are built in within them, programming that are within these dogs. Now, our programs, our tapes, or the record players that are playing in our mind have much to do with how we react to reality, to life, to people, to situations, to events, to our own thoughts and our own moods, or to the way we're treated. So reactivity is a huge part of this program. How do we overcome reactivity? How do we attain stillness? Now, Eckhart Tolle does a good job in describing stillness in Stillness Speaks, a shorter book of his. I covered the topic of stillness from yogic philosophy, and I'm going to be encountering things that I've learned in this form of meditation called conscious mental rest. The Silva method of mind control, now called the Silva Life System or the Accelerator System, as well as TM, Transcendental Meditation, which uses a mantra to take you beyond thought to the source of thought into a blissful, restful state, as well as using autosuggestion, such as using A Course in Miracles workbook affirmations. I'll be introducing metaphysical meditations as well, meditations to help heal subpersonalities, and much more. Now, I mentioned yoga philosophy, and what we'll definitely be touching upon later on is the practical application of breathing techniques, of concentration techniques, how to interiorize, how to attain God communion in your state of meditation, how to attain stillness, how to overcome restlessness, as we've been talking about, and how to relax the body. We got to get the body's tensions out of the way before we can begin to work on the mind. The body and the mind are wrapped up almost simultaneously in the experience of the ego, and because of the split, because of that, there exists within us the voice for the ego and the voice for God, or the inner voice, the higher self, the God self, or the Christ self, or the Buddha self, whatever you want to call it, our true nature, our conscience. And because we have the two things, we're always going to feel like we're in conflict. But when we have those moments of God contact, acquaintance with God, personal experiences of God, revelations from God, prophecies from God, experiences of illumination, light infusing our brains, infusing our chakras, our crown chakras, and our Christed third eye chakra, even through where Paramahansa Yogananda talks about the cosmic energy entering our body in the medulla oblongata, which is opposite the third eye, or the Agna chakra in between the two eyebrows. Now we'll learn all about yogic anatomy as well, because I think it's very important for anybody from any religion. It's not witchcraft, witchcraft is sadly misunderstood too, but there's a lot of conservative people out there in their conservative boxes and in their rigid boxes who say that, oh, yoga, I mean, there's no way that could be a part of what I do because it's not from my religion. It didn't come from my religion. Well, yoga is really an art and science that transcends all religion, that is universal. That is a universal tactic. If you want to say that it's a religious practice, it can be called that because what religion means to retie or reconnect oneself with God. Now, I have a quote from one of Paramahansa Yogananda's disciples, Swami Kriyananda, or J. Donald Walters, sorry. He says that the average person's mind is in its wakeful state, flows in an unending series of thought patterns, usually expressed in the form of words. And most of these mental words are a mere waste of energy. Well, it's definitely parallel to what Eckhart Tolle says in The Power Now. When he says most of the thought is repetitive and useless. This mere waste of energy that Kriyananda is talking about is can be a manifestation of a schizoid state. And you do not have to be diagnosed by the DSM, the Diagnostic Statistical Manual of Psychopathological Disorders, to have a schizophrenic temperament. Tools like the Enneagram tell us that the energy types of 5 and 6 are schizoid types, schizoid paranoia and schizoid avoidant. These traits become ingrained in our personalities. Now, some might argue that personality is something that forms as a result of just socialization or lack thereof, or how they're nurtured or not nurtured. There's that age-old debate about our temperament. Are we born with it? Are we born with a personality like we're born with a thumbprint or a fingerprint? I would say that in most cases, yes, we're born with a temperament, a specific way of relating, a specific way of being and sensing and feeling and thinking. And I do believe that in many ways, a personality is an attributable, unique expression of God flowing through each one of us. So the diverse and unique personality expressions are God in his and her many manifest, expanding, ever expansive, ever becoming, never beginning, never ending, always in flux and in flow, like a river of consciousness, a great quantum soup flowing in and through us, constantly expressing in new ways. So it would be awfully dang boring if we all were, had no affect, no emotional intonations or inflections in our voice, and I could sit here and just drone on, and that wouldn't be very interesting, especially when you want to learn something about somebody like myself who has had to overcome extreme forms of schizoid-related disorders, or labels, rather. I am not a disorder. This presentation is not about what I have or had and why I have or had it, but how to live through it, not live with it, because you can never be defined by an illness or by a set of symptoms, such as hearing voices or getting a lot of extrasensory information, which was the case for me, and which is the experience that I have had to go through. An extreme form of information overload that has sometimes been expressed through inner chatter or dialogue. And I think we all experience that to some degree. And that's not to condemn people or to tell you you're bad or to tell you that there's something wrong with you and that you need to be fixed. No. Fragmentation is a universal state, and wholeness or holiness is a state to which we all have to return, which is really a remembering of who we are, which is the Christ, the Buddha, Krishna consciousness, Christ consciousness, Buddha consciousness, enlightened consciousness, messianic consciousness. There's other labels, there's other terms for that state of desired attainment that we need to return to. Now, again, I was saying this is not about what I have or what I had and why I have or had it. I shouldn't even say why I have it, because I don't have it. It doesn't have me. Not anymore. I don't have it. I don't own it. It doesn't own me either. But I do experience the universal phenomenon of inner chatter when I'm not in meditation or not having a somatic experience through what is most dear to my heart, which is the experiencing of the Eucharist. And that same God contact experience or same God union experience might be meditation for somebody like Yogananda or his disciples. I think that the art of Kriya Yoga, which she did bring to America, is a way to experience God internally. And, I mean, what is the Eucharist? The Eucharist is an expression of, an outward expression of an inward reality. Now, we take the elements in when we have the Eucharist, bread and wine transformed into the body and blood, if you believe that. And I do believe that, and it doesn't matter if you don't. Something might not happen for you, but something happens for me. And it takes me to a place where I'm still, where I'm calm, where I'm at peace, where I'm rejuvenated, where I'm regenerated, and new life seems to be born in me, again and again, in the partaking of it. Now, not to go off track too much, but Paramahansa Yogananda in his 2-volume book, The Second Coming of Christ, talks about the blood of Christ and the body of Christ, consciousness already existing within us, and that when people practice the Eucharist, it's symbolic for what already exists within us. The cosmic energy being the blood, and Christ consciousness being the word, or the body, the bread of life. So, again, trying to spit it out, it's not what this is, me talking about my experiences with this label that I was given by the science world, that I refuse to accept as the definition of who I am. In the same way, I can't define myself simply as priest or bishop-elect or Swami Christos or reverend or Zion Samadhi priest or Messianic shamanic priest. The spiritual names that have come along the way. Zai Red Medicine Bear, Swami Christos Brahmanandi Brahma Christopher. These names and self-definitions, they are not who I am. Neither are yours. They're just a means to an end. They point to something greater, which is ourselves, our true selves, our soul, the spirit flowing through us. So I do want to get that quote out, that quote that I was saying. This is not about what I have, because I don't have it, or had. Instead of saying had, I should say, or what I experienced, and why people might think that I have or had it. But how to live with it, how to be victorious over it, and to ultimately dissolve its chronic effects, and finally to transmute it from base darkness to the light of radiant gold. I consider this to be the work that C.G. Jung so highly praised, and that many of his students throughout time have used effectively in spiritual direction work and in psychotherapy. How to integrate the shadow, the undesirable aspects of oneself. How to integrate and allow from the unconscious the true self to emerge. Now, speaking in terms of thought, reactivity, desires, sense experiences, sense stimulation, sense stimuli rather. We need to transcend it. That's really what this program is all about. We need to transcend it. We need to transcend thought. Joseph Chilton Pearce talks about that as being the next step in evolution. Transcending thought. Thinking was necessary. Thinking is a part of creating language structure. And it allows us to communicate, allows us to interpret, allows us to cognize data that we see, information we receive from the 5 senses, from our eyes, from our nose, from our mouth, from our touch, from our smell. Messages are sent in the form of electrochemical charges or through neurons in our body. Chemicals and neurons and electricity in our body are messengers that, they could have a silent word attached to them. Now, there's a quote here that I wanted to share. Dr. David Hawkins says, "Everything in the universe, including a passing thought, is recorded forever in the timeless field of consciousness, which is everywhere equally present. All that has ever occurred, either physically or by thought, is equally available, because the field is beyond time and space. There is no here or there. There is no now or then. The totality is equally and permanently present everywhere." The Course in Miracles says that there are no private thoughts. So does that mean that because I'm having a fantasy about my ex-girlfriend or something like that, that everybody knows about it? No, but in the collective consciousness or the collective unconscious, there is like this giant mass flowing river of idea energies known as archetypes, and thought exists out there as vibration. Thought is vibration. Words are vibrations. Thought in yogic philosophy is tied up with the causal reality, ideational reality. And from the ideations and from thoughts come energy in the astral world. And from energy comes the densification into gross material matter. It takes on inertia. Now, if there's this field of thought, it's the same idea that is spoken of in the Bible, the book of life. Will your name be written in it? Well, many people think that there's people who are predestined to be written in it. Many people believe that they're the only ones that will be in it and that other groups will not be in it. Well, I'm here to tell you we're all in it. No matter what we do and what we say, we can never do anything to separate ourselves from the love of God. And unless you really come to know that oneness with God is the ultimate reality, union with God, God union, yoga, is the state which we need to attain and remember and return to. Not create. We can't create it. We can't manufacture our own salvation. Real salvation is, or being saved from self-destruction, is being in the presence of God. Being in union with God, being at one with God, being entrained with the Trinity of mind, body, soul, being present in the body, aware in our souls and spirits, conscious of who we are, which is the Christ, which is that anointed one, Christ consciousness. Universal inspiration. I have another quote from Swami Kriyananda. It's a sad commentary on this age of supposed enlightenment that most people, teetotalers as well as alcoholics and other addicts, are quite ignorant of the fact that man's alternative to a restless and often anguished wakefulness is not necessarily oblivion, but that real release lies in expanding one's consciousness beyond the confinements of thought. This is known as the state of superconsciousness. There's a great book Kriyananda wrote. It's called Awaken to Superconsciousness. It's a book that many people across the spectrum could relate to and could benefit from. You don't even have to be a full-fledged believer in yoga, but some of yoga philosophy is in there, and it's very good. It's a good beginner's book about how to raise your consciousness. That's what we want to do. We want to be risen. We want to rise above fragmentation, above the schizoid state, from alienation and from every form of avoidant or paranoid state. Expansion's the key word. Beyond the confinement of thought. We are not our thoughts. You are not your thoughts. Like the Course in Miracles workbook lesson says, one workbook lesson says, my thoughts do not mean anything. And like the practice of conscious mental rest teaches in other forms of meditation, we need to just observe our thoughts as they go by. Like a boat going down the river, like we're sitting on the bank of a river, and we just watch a boat go by. We don't jump into the boat or jump into the thought. We just watch it go by. And not every thought that comes to us means something. We don't have to give meaning to every thought that we have. When we ascribe meaning to our thoughts, then we start to suffer. Or we experience false states of elation or inflation. substitutes for love. Absolute love needs no words to express itself. It's a presence. It's knowing. So, yeah, well, God speaks to us, you might say. God has spoke to Moses, all the prophets. What about them? Are they schizophrenic? Well, people throughout history, if they had a word for schizophrenia back then, they might have thought that about Moses and about the prophets. I don't personally think that every time the Bible, the Old Testament said, the Lord God says, that was God speaking to Moses outright, like with a big megaphone or a big booming deep voice from the sky. I think it was something he heard within. But I don't think he always heard from God. I think he was hearing from his own ego or from the darker side of the cosmic play of forces. The cosmic play of forces is a phenomenon talked about by Tal Malachi, lineage holder of the Sophian Gnostic tradition, non-dual Gnosticism, non-world-hating Gnosticism. He is the founder of Ecclesia Pista Sophia. I've been heavily influenced by Tal Malachi's work in his esoteric cosmology. Cosmology is cosmology and ontology, or the study of the cosmos and creation and being, the state of being, and being is in creation. He gets a lot of it from the Kabbalah, which was from Jewish mysticism, but he teaches a Christian Kabbalah, Gnostic Christian Kabbalah. So that's where I just got that play of forces from. Now, he talks about there being not just dark and light, but admixed forces. And it's the admixture that accounts for horrible things that happen in the world. We have the free will given to God, which was given to us because of an act of God in the process of emanating out of the fullness of heaven, creating, expanding out, emanating out from heaven. In the cosmology of the Kabbalah, Christian Kabbalah, is this act called the Tzimtzum, which is a constriction or restriction, an act of God withholding God's self from that process of emanating and creating the universes. It was to create a primordial space in which creation, or man, woman, those made in the image of God, would be able to choose and be and have the freedom of free will. So that's a big thing in our thought structures and paradigms and models of thought, is the fact that we have free will. And free will sometimes separates us from God. And so the state of separation sometimes exists in conflict. Well, it always exists in conflict, but we sometimes experience, to a greater or lesser degree, the experience of separation, friction, from rubbing up against God, what God's trying to do in our lives. And that, it creates a conflict ultimately. Not free will. Free will can actually do us some great good. At this time, I want to offer not a poem, but a prayer by Sri Goswami Kriyananda, the infinite Lord of stillness. O infinite Lord of stillness, may we approach thee at the altar of stillness. May we who gather here at this most holy altar lay flowers of silence at thy holy feet. O Lord of stillness, teach us to meditate with fervent, silent devotion. O Lord of stillness, teach us to commune with thee. Teach us to contact thee. O infinite Lord of stillness, teach us how to gently decree thy holy presence. Remove from us, O Lord of stillness, all mechanical meditation, all mechanical words, and offer at thy altar of silence our souls to thee. Teach us to gently and humbly request thy presence. Take from us the veil of ignorance that we might not drown, but remain awake in thee and thy service. Fill each cell of our being with thy luminous light. Fill each petal of our mind with thy luminous love. Fill our lives with thy luminous wisdom. O Lord of stillness, strengthen us that we might see the highway to heaven and thus find thee. So, devotion, stillness, self-offering. This is all a part of true meditation, true practice, true technique. Not to sound too scientific, but technique is involved in bypassing the egoic restless mind. And we'll learn those techniques. But first, what I want to do is I want to really share the experience, both the amazing mystical experience that opened up my perceptions and faculties to a higher awareness of God, my illumination experience, my self-realization process, my Christ realization, Christhood realization process, as well as the dark night of the soul that I did have to go through, the spiritual emergencies I encountered, and how I made it through and ultimately came into ministry as a Swami Christos, as a priest, and as a shaman. So, this kind of ends our introductory session. We'll take a break now. Thank you.